You know, just to say it right up front, it was the easiest book I ever wrote and the hardest book I ever wrote. Took me a full 2 years. Usually I would do it in a couple months. And the first iteration, pretty much 2 years ago during my Lenten retreat, just flowed out of me. The skeleton was all there. But as many of you probably know too well, I talk in an effusive, overexcited. All my editors say I use way too many exclamation points. like every sentence is worth hearing forever, you know. So I was forced to submit to some very good editors. And they helped me see, you know, that paragraph doesn't really follow from the one right above it. And if you'd eliminate that chapter, it'd be much clearer. And that went back and forth for 8 times, which was good for my humility. But I don't think the skeleton message changed. We hope we just made it more accessible so it doesn't scare people. And of course, my desire as a part of the perennial tradition is to speak things with authority because they're not my ideas. And that's how the Franciscans trained me. I'm not the source. I'm the conduit. Now, I've already met some German speakers here. They know what my last name means. Rohr means conduit. And I'm quite aware that's all I am. But that's when I know there's another source and I'm just drawing upon that in a very limited way. I mean, God deliberately made me not so good looking, sort of short and dumpy, you know. B student in school. I was never an A student, really. And I don't think I'm that saintly. So God made sure I was quite ordinary, as Paul speaks of earthen vessels. And yet I can say, and this is not anything even approaching bragging, I know this is good stuff because it's not mine. It really isn't. If I couldn't be quoting the scriptures, the fathers of the church, the councils of the church, the mystics and the saints, and the other religions throughout the ages, I would have no confidence that I had any right to say this. And I think that's what it should mean to be Catholic. And so a lot of times good, well-intentioned evangelicals come up to me and they think they got me. And they say, "Are you a universalist?" They say it with the most fierce inflection. You'd think a monotheist would want to have one God who created all things, wouldn't you? But they think they've really done you in. And I come back with my too clever answer, yes, I'm a Catholic. And you all know that's what the word Catholic means, universal. But it's taken us a very long time. Now, what I'd like to do tonight, pray that I can do it with some clarity, is help us recognize why our very place in history, the evolution of consciousness, is allowing us to understand things this way. And previous centuries weren't ready for it. It's not their fault. They were smarter than I am, holier than I am. But for those of you familiar with spiral dynamics, and it's not necessary for salvation, it's like the Enneagram. But it is very helpful to help you know that century by century, in fact, not being too clever, we've almost advanced a year, a century since the time of Christ, which makes us, if you're going to use that calculus, about 21. We're young adults, and we're ready to see things in a young adult way. I'm so convinced it's the large amount of people who are disaffiliating with Christianity from all of our denominations, mostly in the northern hemisphere. They're not bad people, you know this. In fact, very often, they're more conscientious, more concerned for social justice than churchgoers, and I think that can be statistically proven. And you wonder, how did this happen? How did we create so many Christians who don't love the world? Let me just leave it at that. So many Christians who really don't love the world. Their intention since the beginning and their early training has been to get away from it. Really. An evacuation plan to the next world, which creates a fear-based entrance exam and draws largely fear-based people. Not servants necessarily, not lovers, not big vision people, but fire insurance people. And that worked for a lot of centuries. But we finally had to ask, why do so many of our people have such little spiritual curiosity? And anything you say that isn't what they learned in catechism class is immediately called heresy. I mean, what else? I mean, I started my Baltimore catechism, as many of you Catholics did, when I was a little 6, 7-year-old boy. I memorized what we were commanded to memorize. But how else could I understand that except with the mind of a 7-year-old boy? And so to just keep repeating that and never asking, what does that mean, is to remain spiritually infantile. And I'm afraid Sunday school did the same for a lot of our good Protestant brothers and sisters. And now we have neuroscience to help us understand that phenomenon, that what you're told of a dramatic nature, of an infinite nature, of an eternal nature, it lodges in what they call the lower brain stem. Imagine when I was a little 7-year-old and first heard those good Irish nuns that taught me, although they were good women, but they were just passing on what they believed about the pains of hell. Now imagine a little 7-year-old boy. In fact, Sister told us that if you could watch an eagle fly over the top of a mountaintop, right, and its wings barely scrape the top of the mountain, as long as it would take to wear down that whole mountain. Oh, and the eagle only flew every 100 years. All right. And she'd say it with a dramatic flourish, that would only be the beginning of hell. I mean, no wonder we had religious PTSD. I mean, And of course, negative messages lodge there in the lower brain stem and are not subject to rational later analysis. We just hold on to them and live in that fear center. So any talk of, well, let me say it to you this way. And I'm going to ask you for a little audience participation. What is half of infinite? Infinite. What's a fourth of infinite? Infinite. What's 100th of infinite? Infinite. Now, neuroscience is helping us here, too. And I've read, I hope I'm reading the right people, that the human mind cannot form concepts of infinity or eternity. We have to whittle them down into a calculus that makes sense to us. And so we live inside of what we now call a worldview of scarcity, because we can't imagine infinity. Now, in many ways, and it's not necessary, I'm not trying to sell old books, but in many ways, this book, The Universal Christ, is a sequel to the divine dance. First, we had to try to make clear that whoever God is a dynamic infinitude. And any attempt to place this model of total abundance inside of a model that we could handle, which is usually what we call retributive justice. Almost the entire Bible, except for Jesus himself and Paul's notion of grace, although there's hints prepared, very clear hints in the Hebrew Scriptures, preparing us for what these good Jewish boys said. But it was just, frankly, for the most part, too much to imagine. We can't imagine it. And so we prefer some kind of quid pro quo, tit for tat. One act of adultery, 800 years in purgatory. That made sense, to an old-time Catholic, But at least we Catholics got a little wiggle room. There was an end to 800 years, I don't know what you Protestants did, and you became rather black or white, heaven or hell. There was no in between, And afraid, I should say, to ask the question of, how about all those people before Jesus? You do know, I'm sure you know, 2,000 years is a nanosecond in geological time. Did God just start talking 2,000 years ago? Could that possibly be true? Is God that stingy? Is God that scarce and hiding? That all those previous nations and civilizations, the Chinese Empire was 6,000 years old already, but those people didn't matter, I know they were women and children and some good men now and then, but they didn't matter. Is that imaginable? Who is this God who creates throwaway centuries, throwaway nations, throwaway civilizations, just waiting for us? There's only one thing more dangerous than egocentricity, and that's group egocentricity. When your whole group decides that your tribe is the best, and you're the favorite, and it's so consoling to that same 7-year-old mind that first hears some kind of religious teaching. Well, we're in the right group. And I'm sure we need that ego structure. We need that comfort. We need that assurance, that validation. I'm a chosen one. I'm blessed. I'm good. But we should grow up eventually to see that, well, I'm not that good. And my country isn't always perfect. And my denomination has done some pretty stupid things. That's very easy for a Catholic to say. But I think it's actually pretty easy for all of us to say. In fact, to remain inside of organized Christianity, you have to have pretty highly developed non-dual consciousness. You can't survive without it. In fact, if you split and separate all the bad parts over into Asia or Africa or on gay people or Protestant people, as we did, you remain pretty stupid. You have almost no self-knowledge, and you live in a prison of your own making. And certainly our present state of politics reveals this. How could this United States have this many universities, this many churches, this many PhDs, this many educated people and end up in the state we're in today? Because what we learn is that education is not the same as transformation. And we confuse those two. You can have 3 PhDs and still be totally self-centered, totally egocentric. It's all about you and you winning. So when you stay in that smaller frame of win-lose, which if you've lived your whole life inside the world of sports and business, that's the frame that makes sense to you, win-lose. There have got to be winners and there have got to be losers. And it's actually unimaginable to imagine a win-win worldview. Now, what I'm trying to say, is that I think the name for that win-win worldview for us, it's not the only name, but it works. It's the shortcut. You know how you have on your computer when you want to get there quickly, you push the shortcut. The shortcut word, starting in Judaism, and you're going to see this ritualized already starting tonight, was that which is anointed. And the Hebrew word for pouring sacred oil over a material object was mesach, which became Messiah, which in Greek was Christ, which meant the anointed one. And if you've ever been to India, you've seen the ritual for some reason is rather universal. Go in any Hindu temple, and they're always pouring oil over material objects. It's a human way of visualizing sacredness, specialness, godliness, enlightenment. And we're going to see this was already offered us in the Hebrew Scriptures. But it's precisely over material reality. So I hope you read the quotes I had right at the beginning. I'm going to read all 3 of them again. Karl Rahner, one of my favorite teachers, I used to visit his Jesuit tomb in Innsbruck when I was trying to learn German there without any success. The only really absolute mysteries in Christianity are the self-communication of God in the depths of existence, which we call grace, and in history, which we call Christ. So Christ is a corporate word for the anointing of reality with divine presence. And what I'm trying to say in this book, that started with the Big Bang. It didn't start 2,000 years ago. Is it conceivable to believe that God had nothing to say and no interest in dinosaurs and woolly mammoths? They were all just, just pretend or something? For 13.6 billion, not million, billion years. If that's true, we have a universe empty of meaning, empty of any inherent sacredness, which led us to our present political, social situation, where we are raping the very earth that we all live off of, without exception. There's not a Hindu or a Catholic or a Buddhist way of standing on this planet. We're all standing on it and living off of it the same. But we thought we could kill it. And now it's accelerating, as you know, at a very quick pace. Then the second quote, which I bet most of you never heard of St. John of Damascus, except Lee Stamen, our librarian. He's an expert in this. I do not worship matter, St. John Damascene says. He's a father of the church, 7th, 8th century. I worship the God of matter, who became matter for my sake and deigned to inhabit matter who worked out my salvation through matter. I will not cease from honoring that matter which is still working out my salvation. This was when we still had incarnational Christianity. It wasn't this Platonic version that most of us were given, that matter and spirit were separate, not just separate, but enemies. And that led to our horrible sexual teaching. I can't think of a Christian denomination I'm aware of that has a positive understanding of human sexuality. It's fear-based, it's blame-based, it's dualistic, it's fear-based. How do you live when you're afraid of this very thing you're living inside of, that it's always bad? And of course, here I blame my otherwise hero Paul, who did, and I can't forgive him for this, you know what I'm going to say, he used the unfortunate word flesh to put in contradistinction to the word spirit. Dang it! Why did he do that? And he did it over and over again. And the Greek word sarx, flesh, doesn't connote sex as it does in our languages. It simply connotes the material universe, which is self-centered. I always tell folks, every time you read the word flesh in Paul, just put in the word ego. The self-centered self that isolates itself from connection, from communion, from respect, from dignity received and granted. So poor Paul, he didn't know he was doing that, but you know, the very verse that we're making so much of, that if you were a Christian you grew up with, was John 1:14, and the Word became flesh. Which one should I believe? Which is the good flesh? Well, let's in this case choose John over Paul, because he says flesh is good. The Word became flesh. And of course, I translate word, as we will in our liturgies, as the blueprint. Because if we use those old religious words too much, we all agree with them if you're Orthodox Christians, but we don't have a clue what they mean. We really don't. We just mouth them. So try blueprint for a while. The blueprint was with God, and the blueprint in a moment of time showed itself in personal form. That's the belief of a Christian. Incarnation is our trump card. I shouldn't use that. I'm sorry. Incarnation is our ace of spades, or I don't know, something else. Forgive me. All right. Then finally, the wonderful quote from Thomas Merton. No despair of ours can alter the reality of things, nor stain the joy of the cosmic dance which is always there. The cosmic dance has been happening for at least 13.6 billion years. And even in the Middle Ages, when they asked the question, could the universe be eternal? The official church never issued a judgment on that. And they instead said, we don't know. You may not deny it, you may not affirm it, wholly unknowing. And of course, all notions of time even break down. But our notion of time, at least the one I largely believed in my early Christianity, was, it was based on a God who once existed on this earth 2,000 years ago. So it often was based on believing in a memory, trusting that the memory was true. And then people like Dominic Crossan began to study the Scriptures, and we realized that to read the Scriptures with spiritual intelligence we got to have a sort of a course that's called Literature 101. And most of us weren't given a course in how to read literature, much less spiritual literature. And so when we began to critique, starting about 150 years ago, that this was poetry, this was history, this was journalism, this was apocalyptic, this scared a lot of Christians. A lot of them left over it, either hunkering down and saying, what I learned in the first grade is eternally true, or saying I was fooled in the first grade and I'm throwing the whole thing out. The way of faith, the way of wisdom, is what Jesus calls the narrow path, where you don't submit to those extremes, which only lead to stupidity. So we ended up believing or trying to believe in a memory. But do you see what that does? That places God, Jesus in our case, in the past. So if you're going to have an active, agency-filled religion, where God is active, where God is present, where God is available, where God is involved, and certainly not a critical spectator, that's what I grew up with. God as a critical spectator. Critical. You live basically in an unsafe universe. And you had to believe in all these memories, which critical analysis helped us to see were not straight journalism, but were sacred literature. And we just weren't trained to process that. So our religion became a past tense religion. And I'm convinced, I'm not smart enough to know if it's the only reason, but it's certainly a big reason why so many have left. There isn't any sense of active agency, of an omnipresent, ubiquitous presence that you couldn't get away from. In fact, Jesus, we could call the visibility of God, if you're a Christian, the personalization of what was eternally true if you're a Christian, but really he stopped being visible after the ascension. No more visibility, so it all became recalling a memory. The good old days when the people who really saw Jesus. We don't have that luxury anymore. But we do have the luxury of a man who wrote a whole bunch of letters in the New Testament, who never, thank God, knew Jesus in the flesh. Paul. He only knew the Christ. And that's what you and I have access to. And you know what? The Christ is supremely visible. What we're trying to say here is that everything your eyes have ever seen is the visibility of God, is the presence of God. You have to be stupid and blind to miss the ecstasy of God in every little animal, which Meister Eckhart said is another word about God. And my Father Francis called brother and sister, who lived in a communion of relationships like the native religions did. And this is emerging as a huge surprise and humiliation, frankly, that so much that I'm trying to say, and others, many others better than I, are trying to say, is so similar to what we used to call paganism, animism, native religions, and now we have to say, oh my God, maybe they were closer to the truth than we were. And if you think I'm a heretic, John Paul II, no raging liberal pope, when he gathered the native tribes in Phoenix 30 years ago, all the tribes sent their representatives, and he said with great enthusiasm, you already believed in the Great Spirit in all things. And we have to convince Catholics that that's true. because we've got the world divided into sacred things and unsacred things. As far as I'm concerned, that destroys the whole transformative power of the Christian religion, because we leave up to the malicious, small, fragile ego the freedom to decide what's in and what's out. We now know, after 2,000 years of anti-Semitism, anti-feminism, anti-anything that wasn't us, now anti-Islam, it's just every century has its new thing that Christianity is able to be anti about. It doesn't create a cosmic religion. It doesn't found religion in creation, in nature, which makes it universal, but it's dependent upon a private revelation that only a few people, frankly few, in all of history, I don't know what the percentage would be, but most of the creatures God has created have not ever heard about Jesus Christ. Are we really supposed to judge that these, beloved of God, do not matter? My mind and my heart doesn't allow me to believe that. God really is everywhere and all the time. The evangelicals love to say it. You're going to give it away right now. God loves you. Very good. See, the Catholics didn't know how to say that. We're teaching them something, though, you know. They think he's only in the Catholic Church, you know. Well, that's where we were trained. Psalm 36 says, "How precious, O God, is your love. We feast on the bounty of your house, to live inside of this universal house. You give us drink from your river of pleasure." The Jews weren't afraid of pleasure, good pleasure. Addictive pleasure, sure. But we were so afraid of addictive pleasure that we couldn't trust good pleasure. With you is the fountain of life. By your light, we see light. And this, I believe, is the light of Christ. It's just enough light offered to you so that you can see the light inside of everything else. That's why the primary metaphor, starting with "let there be light," the creation on the first day, is, I believe, going through the whole of the Bible, Hebrew scriptures, Christian scriptures. This is the one I've studied in since 1965. It's all marked up. What you want to look for, just like a little bookmark all the way through, is this metaphor of light. And that's the giveaway that we're talking about, the emergence of the Christ mystery. And we'll have some beautiful scriptures in the liturgy tonight, which I hope, make that very clear. You are the light by which we see light. Let me try this. Now, one of the reasons I can talk this way and not be called a heretic, and one cardinal even called me a couple weeks ago and said, "Don't let them call you a heretic." This was the conservative cardinal of New York City. Couldn't believe it. He said, "I've read the whole book. Richard, it's not heresy." I got that from you-know-who. I never even knew he heard of me or knew of me, you know. Because the one reason the mind is accessible to these ideas is, frankly, and this is going to surprise some, is science. We call them neutrinos. We call them fractals. That we are told, I can't figure it out, that there is light inside of everything. There is no such thing in the entire universe as total darkness. The neutrinos are the streaks of light that the human eye cannot see that are floating through darkness. Another thing that takes away our inability to imagine the infinite is, again, frankly, and you're the first age that has enjoyed it, is the Hubble telescope. And I'm sure, I hope, you've seen the pictures. If you haven't, Google them right now. And you're the first age that knows that not only is this universe still expanding outward from approximately 13.6 billion years ago, but it's expanding at a faster rate. Who is this God? Who is this God? And we talk so glibly. Well, one thing I can say for sure, this God has to be as big as the universe, don't you think? Or maybe even a little bigger. He can't be stingy. He can't be operating out of a worldview of scarcity. He can't be afraid of more. All our dear Jesus does to personify all this is walk around granting free health care to everybody. I mean, you can't deny that. Healing, 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 healing. And I want you to imagine and know that healing, and this isn't oversimplified, I don't think, is to be understood in contradistinction to punishing. If you understand, most of the religions of the world felt evil, fault, sin, localized again in the body, was to be excluded, was to be shunned, was to be punished. And we have Jesus going always to those on the edge, those on the outside, not punishing them, but healing them. Now that's the mind's advance from retributive justice, which is, I'm afraid, large portions of the Bible. Pick up Dom Crossan's book on how you can still read the Bible and be a Christian. Is that, yeah, it's said better than that. But he presents the conflict, that we've got Jesus in his lifetime totally nonviolent, but then you get to the book of Revelation and he's coming with his terrible swift sword out the middle of his mouth, and the blood is as high as the ears on the horses. What happened? Which one do we believe? And I want to give you that dramatic example to help you struggle with this issue, that this distinction between Jesus and Christ is a not unimportant distinction. Because unless you see this, you end up very often with two different Jesuses. Is that a word? I don't know. And I think it created in Christian minds a kind of schizophrenia. Can we trust him today? Do we like him today? And I've certainly worked both as a spiritual director and as a confessor with many people who do not trust God, do not trust Jesus. Because once you're inflicted with spiritual PTSD, that God is whimsical, that God can change on a dime, that God can change his mind and like some people but punishes other people? Are we really supposed to believe that Yahweh, the God of Israel, told the good Jewish people to kill all the Canaanite people? That he so wanted them to have that little piece of land? And this still affects politics today, need I say? Need I say? Oh yeah, God wants this little piece of land for the chosen people. You know what chosen people are for? And I've had my Jewish friends tell me this. Chosen people are chosen to tell everybody else that they're chosen too. Not to make yourself special and separate, but to say, you know what God's love does? You know what infinite love does? Infinite love outpours. So Christ is the eternal, infinite outpouring of God. No exceptions. And everything your eyes have ever seen with your visible eyes are the outpouring of God. Both the beauty and ecstasy of God, and here's where Jesus brings in the hard message, also the suffering of God. Our human bodies are a participation in the suffering of God. Suffering is one, salvation is one, sin is one, resurrection is one. We're a part of one giant Jesus Christ train, and you don't have to call it that at all. But you're on the train, whether you know it or not, just by reason of existing. No despair of ours can alter the reality of things, nor stain the joy of the cosmic dance, which is always there. It's always going on. And you can either say yes to it, I am the ecstasy of God, and I am the suffering of God, very often both on the same day. And you know what? One doesn't cancel out the other. You can hold both of them. And I think that must be what it means to be a great-souled person, to be able to hold both. God apparently knew that the holding of the suffering God would be very hard for humanity. So he had to present it to us in the form of a crucified God, a God who was totally powerless. You know, think of all of our prayers in the Roman Church and the Anglican Church about Almighty God, Almighty God, Almighty God. We just love to begin prayers with Almighty God. That just reveals to me right there, we only got half of the message. Because if we would have understood the whole mystery of divine outpouring and divine self-emptying, we would have known that we have to say, all vulnerable God, all poor God, all suffering God. That sends you on a whole different track. And that's what Paul refers to as the folly of the cross. And all I'd say, if you've never heard it before, I know it's shocking and frankly disappointing. But don't throw it out too easily until you've come to suffering in your own life. Because when that happens, you need something to know that this somehow matters and that God is participating with us in it, through us and with us and in us, as we say at the end of the Eucharistic prayer. You can dismiss necessary suffering until you're carrying it. And then you long for something to make sense out of it. Because suffering is always unjust, it's always illogical, it's always undeserved, it's always why me? Now, a lot of us, we've been able to put that off. Until the last few years, I lived with a rather healthy body, like probably most of you do. And you always feel it's never going to happen to me. But I want to say this clearly so we can see the gospel not as a threat, but as an invitation to find meaning in every aspect of life, to find Christ in everything, even the suffering part. No exceptions. So once you know that, you can't exclude or punish imperfection, sin. Who are the unworthy ones now? Huh? Who are the ones who are more unworthy than you're unworthy? We quote one of the verses from the New Testament, we Catholics do, before we come up to the table, and they say it so piously and so fervently, Lord, I am not worthy that you come under my roof, but only say the word, and my soul will be healed. And then many of these young priests, now, will all the worthy come forward? Huh? Come on. You have just publicly declared before all your neighbors, you are unworthy. We should be racing to the bottom, not to the top. See, these front seats are not the best, all right? You're going to be last, right? We don't want to rush to the front. But that's the human temptation, always to think this is where we get the most, this is where we get the best. You've got to untrain your mind from thinking that way. Because where we meet the Christ is in suffering beauty, suffering perfection. You heard me talk in the middle of the book. People were out there taking pictures of it today about our beautiful cottonwood on the grounds of our center. It might be as much as 150 years old. It has huge gnarled branches. One arborist said it had a mutation that makes all the branches turn in circuitous ways. It's clearly a very imperfect tree. And the ability to see that as divine perfection is the very nature of nature. I challenge you to walk in the woods and find one perfect tree. What would it look like? There's always one branch. There's always a few dead leaves. There's a lot of dead trees on the ground. Human perfection wants to eliminate imperfection. Divine perfection is able gracefully to include imperfection. We have to learn it from God. We don't know how to do it by ourselves. We're trained to get rid of the handicapped. Our government's trying to do it and try to stop, the Special Olympics. What is the value system of this country? If anything's weak, if anything's poor, if anything's on the edge, let's get rid of it. Let's not fund it. If they're immigrants and not on our side of the wall, we can kill them, exclude them, punish them. Do you see what a revolutionary worldview we were given? Which really makes us completely at home in almost nobody's house. But it's our house, the universal house, the one house of God. And it does, we're creating a problem for you because most of the distinctions that your friends make aren't going to make sense to you anymore. It's going to create a problem for you before it offers you a solution. So don't be too excited. It's bad news before it's good news. Do you understand? It really is. But do you want to be universal brothers and sisters? Or do you just want to be members of this tribe or this group or that group? Christ is the light by which we see the light everywhere else. What greater gift could we have? What else is worthy of being called good news? If it doesn't give us that, I don't think it's good, and I don't think it's new. It's the same old bad news of retribution, vengeance, punishment, eliminate the problem, get rid of everybody who isn't like me. And why do we have to say this so straightforwardly? It's tearing us apart. Because this so-called Christian country clearly does not believe this. The version of Christianity that we exported to much of the rest of the world, we got to say it, was the version that was largely created by slaveholder religion. The southern part of the United States that created a highly individualistic, and we all bought it, so I'm not blaming the South. But once you can create a version of Christianity that actually justifies the keeping of slaves, you're dead in the water. This is so far from Jesus, so far from the Sermon on the Mount, so far from love, so far from truth, that it has no business calling itself Christianity. But it disguised itself and disguised itself well, so in South Africa it could create apartheid. There's always someone who's the scapegoat, not realizing that those of us who are Christians had been given a God figure. Does that mean? My inspiration has just stopped. The candle went out. All right. We were given a God figure that was a vengeful God, a punishing God, a fearful God. So let's say it once before we try to end. What part of infinity is half of infinity? What part of infinity is a fourth of infinity? What part of infinity is 1/100th of infinity? You got it. And that's the world we live in. That's the worldview of abundance, grace, where we draw from an infinite source. And so we don't have to parcel out Christ, because Christ, as Paul says, cannot be parceled out. And boy, we've tried in every century to say this group has it and that group doesn't. We are now in a position of supreme powerlessness, because now no longer is it your place or my place to take it upon ourselves to say Christ is here and not there. The Christ we have is everywhere and in everything. Thank you. Am I done?
Wow, that's a hard act to follow. Hi, everyone. My name is Kirsten Oates, and I oversee the program design team at the Centre for Action and Contemplation. And here they come, Bree and Paul in the middle, and Cliff. We're here to describe the group practice sessions that you will see throughout the schedule. This will be an introduction, and then all the sessions will follow this same format. If you're part of our wonderful online community, the instructions we'll be giving will not apply to you directly, but please refer to your online participants' guides for suggestions of how to participate. The purpose of group processing is to give you some time to contemplate more deeply the amazing, rich content you'll be receiving in this conference. Wow, we need some more time to contemplate. It will also be a vehicle for creating a sense of contemplative community. We will be introducing you to a contemplative practice of deep listening and resonance that opens us up to an experience of God in us and in each other. This might feel unusual or challenging at first, so we ask you to trust the process and open your hearts to become and experience the body of this universal Christ. Did everyone get a book today? Yeah. Okay, Oprah's a big hero of mine, so I'm just going to have to do it. You got a book, and you got a book, and you got a book. Yes. I didn't practice that. That wasn't in the rehearsal. But why I'm referring to it is we hope that these practices will help us, as well as this entire conference. But if we look at the subheading of Richard's book, recover a forgotten reality that can change everything we see, hope for, and believe. So we hope that these sessions can help send us on our way. As you spend time in this practice of deep listening, what you may notice is that what arises for you is very, very different from what arises for someone else in this community. And when this happens, we can sometimes get reactive. If this happens to you, just know that this is actually part of the practice, part of the experience we want you to have. Because what we're learning to do through listening is to stay deeply connected to someone that has a different opinion to us. This is a good practice for us. One of the most important things to know as we enter into this practice is it won't be perfect. Also, our introduction won't be perfect either, just so you're ready. But we're all going to learn together. And hopefully by the end of this conference, you'll have something to take away that might be useful in your everyday life. Each time we practice, you will be facilitated by one of my team members, and there'll be slides on the screens to guide you. So you ready to get started? Let's do it. So up on the screen now are the steps we will go through each time we practice. Hopefully, over the sessions, this will start to feel like a comfortable rhythm. The first time we go through them, my team are going to demonstrate a number of them. So the steps are, we'll take a moment with a contemplative practice to center ourselves. We'll review a set of norms about how we're going to participate together. There'll be a time of silent individual reflection, then a time to share what came up for you in that reflection, and a time to resonate. At the end, we'll have a closing bow where we'll honor the universal Christ in all of us. Okay, this practice is going to be done in groups of 3. So I'm going to ask you next to find a group of 3 at your table. If you don't break into groups of 3 equally, you can either be in a pair or move to another table and sync up to have a group of 3. Please don't have any more than 3 or the timing won't work when we're doing the practice. So please take a moment to find your group of 3 and introduce yourselves by name. Okay, hopefully you've had a chance to introduce yourselves, and there'll be some time to share shortly. But before we move into our time of reflection and sharing, we'll start with our centering practice, and Cliff from my team is going to lead us through a practice. Thank you, Cliff.
Thank you, Kirsten. So we want everyone here to feel prepared and ready to be open to what they'll experience during our time together. So we're going to be offering opportunities for contemplative practice to center. So I'm going to ask you right now, if you can, wherever you are in your seat, please just sit comfortably. And if you feel comfortable to do so, please close your eyes, or at least lower your lids, and relax your gaze. Take a nice, comfortable, deep breath, feeling your body, the weight of your body on your chair. Feel any tension that you have in your body just being released on your next out breath. Feel the feeling of your hands on your lap or on the table. Just note any sensations there, any vibrations. Note if your breathing is tense, constricted, or relaxed. Feel the feeling of your feet on this ground, here in this place in New Mexico. And now with your eyes closed and relaxed, we'd like to ask you to consider the intention of our time together this weekend to explore the universal Christ. And consider your willingness and your desire to allow what you learn to become part of your life, part of your being. Father Richard just said it a few moments ago, and he often says that the path of contemplation is learning to live into yes. So right now, check in with yourself and ask if the answer to the next question is yes. Am I ready to be open, to be an open participant in the mystery of the universal Christ at this conference? If your answer is yes, in just a few moments we'll collectively affirm by saying yes together. If you find that right now your answer is not a resounding yes, we still invite you to use your time here to participate in whatever way you are able. Now let your eyes open. And on 3, if your answer was yes, let us say together, yes. 1, 2, 3.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cliff. Next, we will review the group processing norms. And these will always be on a card at your table if you want to take some time later to read over them, and they will also come up on the screen. You will have an opportunity to add a norm, and there will be a time for everyone in the group to consent to the norms so that we know we're all on the same page. Right now, my team are going to describe the norms and then demonstrate how to add a norm, and then we will give our consent to the norms together.
Thank you, Kirsten. So our first norm is speak in the moment from the heart. What we mean by that is let's try to be present to each other and not plan what we want to say while the other person is speaking. And also share what is true for you, whether you think it might be right or not.
Our second norm is be lean of speech. And what that means is that for those of you who maybe are a little more long-winded in these times, that you recognize the space that you're taking up and cut back and just speak to what you really need to say in a brief amount of time. And for my fellow introverts, this is our chance to dig a little bit deeper and to share what we can from the heart.
The next is listen from the heart. And this means really being present to your own feelings, but listening in a non-judgmental way, open and from the heart.
Our fourth norm is respect confidentiality. And we want to try to create safe spaces so that we're sharing honestly from our experiences. So we ask that what you share in your triads stay in your triads and don't reference what is shared later throughout the day or this weekend.
And our last one, called anything else, is for triads to come up with each time if necessary. So if there's something that will help you feel safer in your group, we ask that you bring it up with one another. And so an example of this might be if you have had trauma in your life related to calling to divine with a masculine pronoun, you may ask of the group, can we alternate between feminine and masculine or non-gendered pronouns? That's just an example. And so we're going to give you a minute now to talk amongst your triads, to come up to see if there's anything that resonates for you that you feel like you need to ask of the group as a norm. And if nothing comes up, totally fine. If something comes up tomorrow, that's another opportunity to kind of create a new container with that triad. So you have 1 minute to discuss.
May we have your attention. Thank you. And now, very briefly, we're going to ask you to do the same thing that we asked you to do earlier. Just check in with yourself and see if you're prepared to say yes collectively to these norms we just agreed on. Speaking in the moment, being lean of speech, listening from the heart, respect confidentiality, and whatever other norm you just agreed on with your triad. And if you are, on the count of 3, please say yes. 1, 2, 3.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, team. Yay. So we've done our centering, we've reviewed our norms, and now we're on to reflecting, sharing, and resonating. So the question we will reflect on will be the same each time, and I'm going to read it. It's what insight, word, or phrase touched your heart from the last teaching, and how does it or might it connect with your life? So you'll see that you will reflect on that question individually. Then you'll share what came up for you, and then there'll be a time of resonance, which we'll describe in detail. But for right now, we're going to start with the reflection time, the individual reflection time, using the question. Now, normally you'll have 5 minutes to reflect, and we suggest you do something like journal or review notes that you've taken during the talk, or you could just sit there and breathe and contemplate. Sometimes silence in a conference can feel uncomfortable, but we really believe that if you let these talks sit with you, that they can really work on you and bring new insights. So we ask you to hold the silence and be present to what arises in you. So for now, we're going to spend 3 minutes in silence, reflecting on the question, what insight, word, or phrase touched your heart from Richard's teaching? How does it, might it connect with your life? So I'll ring the bell for us to begin, and then I'll ring the bell in 3 minutes' time when it's time to end. Thank you. Next, we will move into a time of sharing with the group what came up for you. Each person will share with the two other members, and then those two members will resonate with the person who shared. We encourage you to resonate with the exact phrases you see written on the screen. I really resonated when you shared, or I was right there with you when. Now, this is likely a new practice to you, and my team is going to demonstrate the whole thing now. So one person's going to share, and the other two are going to resonate, so you can be clear on what this looks like. So I'll hand over to my team.
I was really, really moved, deeply moved, when Richard said that Christianity that could uphold slavery was problematic by definition. And just hearing him say that really opens me up deeper to the teachings of Jesus and to the universal Christ. It really moved me.
Thank you, Cliff. I really resonated when you shared that what Richard talked about in terms of the incompatibility of slavery being an opening for you.
Thank you, Cliff. I was right there with you when you shared how problematic it is that Christianity was upholding slavery as a system.
Thank you. So you can see that resonance is a way of opening ourselves to be impacted by someone else's experience. And what we're trying to do is to be open and present to someone, so when they feel something like joy or sadness, we might feel it too. Or as they describe an experience, we might feel a part of it. The way we show we've been listening deeply and present to that person is to use this resonance. And the way we're doing it is by using these phrases and then simply repeating back the part of their story that impacted us. Notice that resonance does not include making a comment about what they said, giving them a piece of advice, or sharing a story from your experience that matches something they're saying. These are ways we can avoid a depth of presence and return too quickly to our egoic mind. We're hoping if we use this practice in a disciplined way in a conference like this, that when we move back out into our lives and it's time to be in discussion or debate, we can do it from this place of grounded resonance that we'll find in this practice. You ready? Does it sound okay? So I'll just go back to something I said earlier, which is this doesn't have to be perfect, and it probably won't be the first time. So as we say in Australia, I'm Australian, just have a go. Have a go. Okay, so let's have a go. I'm going to ring the bell, and there'll be 3 minutes where one person will share, and then the other two will resonate. I'll ring the bell a second time. It'll be time for the second person to share what insight, word, or phrase touched them from the teaching, and the other two to resonate. And then a third bell for the third person to share, and a final bell for us to end the sharing and resonance. So let's begin with the first person who'll begin to share after the bell rings. Not at all. Okay. I think It's now time for the second person to share and the other two to resonate. Thank you.
Balance? Typically? Oh, because it was like, this is the right balance. I have like.
It's time for the final person to share and the other two to resonate. Okay, we've come to the end of our sharing and resonating. And my team just wanted to take a moment to resonate with the experience of being present to you all resonating. And I'll start by saying the resonance was awesome, so thank you.
We just want to say we've never done this at a CAC conference before. And you all did that chair-moving, triad-finding, heart-sharing thing really well. So thank you.
It was wonderful to be up here on the stage, and we could actually hear or feel the way everyone was listening. It was just really wonderful to feel. So thank you all for the attention that you brought to that.
And I want to give a shout out to the webcast crowd, who I can tell was resonating at home and connecting. So big thanks to you. Keep up the good work.
Wonderful. Well, before we end with our bow, just some instructions. Right after this session ends, there's an hour break. And then when you come back in, we'll have the first experience of the beautiful, amazing Universal Christ liturgy that's been specifically created for you at this conference. And while that break's taking place, we encourage you to move out of the room, and our liturgy team are going to be setting things on your table. If you do feel like staying in here relaxing, you are welcome to, but please remove as much as you can from the tables. And if you're leaving stuff in here when you leave the room, please move it to under your chair and just clear the tables as much as possible. So before we end, and this will be the way we end each practice session, we'll just put our hands together and we'll do a gentle bow to each other to reflect the honoring of the universal Christ in everyone and everything. So we honor you and thank you.